The first part of Chapter 3 is called Measures of Center. Most of us are already familiar with what the mean, median, and mode are. You might not be familiar with the mid-range, but we're going to talk about that too. Our calculator will do most of the computations for us, so it's almost more important that we understand what each one of these words means, not just what the number answer is. So first of all, the mean is commonly known as the arithmetic mean because in mathematics there's more than one kind. It's what most people would think of as the average. And what it actually means is if I had a ruler and I had all my data points spread out on that ruler, the mean would be like the balance point on a seesaw for all the data that was on the ruler. How do I find the mean? Well, I add them all up and divide by how many there are. The median is the physical middle. It means that to find the middle, if we were going to do it by hand, we'd have to put our data in order, because it's not just the middle in whatever order the data comes in, it has to be the numerical middle. It tells you that half the data is more than that amount and half the data is less than that amount. The mode is the most popular answer, so it's the most common answer. In order to have a mode, you have to have a data item that repeats. If you don't have any repeats, then there just is no mode. If you have more than one data item that repeats, then the mode is just all of them that repeat the most often. Now the mid-range is a little bit different. It's the average of the highest and lowest value. So basically it's the min plus the max. Get that answer and divide it by 2. That'll be the mid-range. Now that one is really susceptible to outliers, so we don't really talk about that one much because it's the middle of the highest and lowest. It gets confused with the median, which is actually the middle of the data. So if I actually find mean, median, and mode mid-range for the numbers that I had listed for your sample, the mean, median, mode, mid-range, those are the answers. Now, you could have done that by hand, but we would put our data in L1 of the calculator, do stat, go over to calc. When you go over to calc, the thing that's already highlighted is one variable statistics. So you hit enter once to get that command to show up on the home screen. Then if your data is in L1, you can just hit enter again. The top of the screen, that's your sample mean. You have to scroll down and it'll tell you the median. It won't tell you the mode. You have to find the mode on your own. The mid-range, it won't compute the mid-range for you, but if you look above and below the median, it will tell you the maximum and the minimum. So then you can fill in the formula with those values. Now, if I look at my data, 840 was what we call an outlier. That was very suspicious. It was very much higher than the rest of the measures of central tendency. So if I go back into my calculator and I find 840 in my data list and hit delete, not on the data list, just on that data value, then I can recompute with the rest of the values that are left. When I do that, never mind, I thought I had that on a different slide. I guess I need to write those in. When I do that, I end up with a mean of 458.33, a median of 455. The mode stays 440, and because the maximum is going to change dramatically, my mid-range becomes 460. Now, if you look at all these values compared to these values, you'll notice that the ones on the right without the 840 are a lot closer together. They're a lot more centered on the data than the original ones. This 630 and the 512.86 had nothing to do with most of the data values. Well, if I want to find a weighted mean, what that means is essentially this. If I've got a frequency distribution, I have 6 numbers that fall between 7 and 18. I've got 10 numbers that fall between 19 and 30. Therefore, I can't make up just any 6 numbers between 7 and 18. So if I don't have the actual data and I can't put in my calculator random numbers between 7 and 18, the number I use for my calculator is the midpoint. So we're going to find the midpoint for each class, and that's what we're going to put in L1. Now, how do I find the middle? Well, the middle for the first class is 7 plus 18. Get that answer divided by 2. 7 plus 18 divided by 2 is 12 and a half. Now I can continue that process and just average each one of these. But I could look down this column and figure out that the difference between 7 and 19 is 12. If I look again, the difference between 19 and 31 is 12. That tells me that the class width is 12. If that's true, then I can find the rest of these midpoints by adding 12, adding 12, adding 12, adding 12. That's a few less keystrokes than finding the average each time. Notice I am not rounding off my midpoints. So now to find the mean, I put the midpoints in L1 and I put the frequencies in L2. Now, my keystroke is slightly different. I'm going to do stat. I'm going to go over to calc. I'm still going to hit enter because one bar stats is highlighted. And that's still what I'm doing. Now I only hit enter once. And that one variable statistics is sitting on my home screen with the cursor blinking right there. Before I hit enter the second time, I have to let the calculator know that I don't want it to just compute on what's in L1. I want it to compute this like it's a frequency distribution. So I tell the calculator L1, comma, L2. That reads it, this is your data, this is your frequency. The comma is above your number 7. Now if I do this, my mean is going to be 41.78. I can scroll down and find my median. My median is 36.5. My mode is the number that occurs the most often. Well, if these are the frequencies, I've got essentially 6 12.5s, 10 24.5s. So the thing that I have the most of is I've got 13 36.5s. So the mode is 36.5. If you want to check yourself, remember, how many data items do I have? If I add up the frequencies, that totals 50. Down at the bottom of my calculator screen, it better say n equals 50. Otherwise, I forgot to do that L1 minus, or L1 comma L2 business. One other thing, and I'll come up here to the sign. When I have a frequency distribution, instead of asking for the mode, which would be the midpoint, I could ask for the modal class. The modal class is which class has the most entries in it, and that would be 31 to 42. I would just list the class limits. Another kind of weighted mean is what happens when you have grades that don't all count the same amount. The hardest part about this is we're given a bunch of different percentages for the weights of our grades, and then we're given our grades, and they're not organized or anything, so you need to organize it into a kind of a chart to make your life easier. So let's start at the top. Test average is 50%. So, bring the label down so you remember what it was for. 50% as a decimal is 0.5, and notice I'm leaving all this space because this is actually the stuff that's going to go in L2. Instead of having a frequency, we're going to have a percentage weight. So test average is 50%, labs are 10%, so lab is 0.10 or 0.1. Homework is 5%. 5% as a decimal is 0.05. Midterm is 15%. And then the final is 20%. Now I'm going to match the grades up. Test average is 86. These are what's going to go in L1 because that's our actual data. Homework is 100. Make sure you put it in the right category. Lab average is 98. Midterm was 96. And an 82 on the final. Once you've done this, it's just like what we did on the last frequency distribution. Put your grades in L1, their weights in L2. You do calculate one variable statistics, and do your L1 comma L2. So when I do one var stats, L1 comma L2, all I need is the mean at the top, and that would be 88.6. And the last one, yay! GPA is just another way of figuring out another weighted mean, only this time it's not a matter of each grade counting a certain percentage. The number of credit hours tells you how much each grade counts. So if I have an A in a 3 credit hour class, essentially that means that A counts 3 times. The A in a 4 credit hour class means that A counts 4 times. B in a 3 credit hour class, C in a 3 credit hour class, and an F in a 1 credit hour class. The part that you need to know, because you can't type like A's into L1 and expect to get any answers. On a 4-point scale, A's equal 4, B's are worth 3, C's are worth 2, D's are worth 1, and F's are worth 0. So instead of typing in A, I'm going to type 4 into L1 twice. B is worth 3, C is worth 2, F is worth 0. L2 is going to get the weights, which is your credit hours. And one more time, I'm going to do calculate, one variable statistics. But again, if I have stuff in L1 and L2, I have to type in L1 comma L2 or I'm not going to get the correct answer. And the correct answer here is 3.07 would be that GPA.